In 1966, an American science fiction film directed by Richard Fleischer and written by Harry Kleiner was introduced to the big screen, and that movie was Fantastic Voyage. The film is about a submarine crew that is shrunken down to microscopic size so that they can go into the body of an injured scientist to repair damage to his brain. The film starred Stephen Boyd, Raquel Welch, Edmund O'Brien, Donald Pleasance, and Arthur Kennedy. Bantam Books actually retained the rights to write a novel off of the screenplay, and they approached Isaac Asimov to write it. Because the novel was actually released 6 months before the movie, many people actually believe that the film was based on the book, but it was the other way around. Rarely do you see this happen, but every once in a while this comes to play. The original idea for the film came from Otto Clement and Jerome Bixby. They sold it to Fox, which actually announced that it would be the most expensive science fiction film ever made. Richard Fleischer was assigned to direct it, and Saul David was going to produce it. Now, Fletcher actually had a one-up on directing this film because he originally studied medicine and human anatomy in college before he chose to go into film directing. The film's budget was originally set at $5 million, and then that inflated to $6 million, with about $3 million of that going to the sets and about $1 million for test footage. This was the first film that Stephen Boyd had made in Hollywood for the past 5 years. And it was actually the first role at Fox for Raquel Welch, who was put under contract after she had been spotted in a beauty contest. Now, the time they spend in the movie of the crew, once they are miniaturized, that is all in real time, taking up almost exactly 1 hour of the movie. It's said that, believe it or not, medical schools in the late 1980s showed clips from this movie to illustrate the various concepts in human anatomy, physiology, and especially immunology. And some of the things that are done today are fairly close to this, other than the fact that there's actually people being shrunk down. The miniaturization concept is definitely there. Now, the scenes of the crew members actually swimming outside of the sub were shot on dry sound stages, and the actors were suspended from wires. This created an additional hazard involving the wires because to avoid reflections from the metal, the wires were actually washed in acid, and this roughened them, and it made them much more likely to break. To create the impression that they were swimming in a resisting medium, the scenes were actually shot at a 50% higher speed than they normally shot them, and they were played back at normal speed, giving the illusion that it was a harder substance to swim in than water. One of the now defunct thrill rides at Disney's Epcot Center was called Body Wars, and it was largely inspired by this movie, and that's even though it's not a Disney movie. You see, director Richard Fleischer had directed Disney's first science fiction movie, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, so he had a connection to Disney. This is one of those odd films that has no music over the opening credits, pretty similar to the way Alfred Hitchcock did The Birds in 1963. Now, the movie was also produced the same year as Lost in Space. If you pay really close attention to the sets and the sound effects, you can definitely sense the similarities. The original on-screen prologue, appearing immediately after the opening 20th Century Fox logo, states, "This film will take you where no one has ever been before. No eyewitness has actually seen what you are about to see. But in this world of ours, where going to the moon will soon be upon us, and where the most incredible things are happening all around us, someday, perhaps tomorrow, the fantastic events you are about to see can and will take place." Now, it's kind of crazy that the plot of the movie is partially borrowed from the sitcom I Dream of Jeannie, an episode called The Moving Finger in 1965. Major Anthony Nelson works as a technical consultant for a studio making a movie in which an American astronaut is shrunken down to the size of a pinhead and he's injected into the bloodstream of a Soviet astronaut. He works his way to his brain and retrieves information vital to the defense of the country. The screenplay of this movie was completed in 1964 from the original story that was written in 1963. Now, the design and the special effects were considered very cutting edge at the time. So much so that they received a photo spread in Life magazine. In a book written by L.B. Abbott, who is a special effects photographic artist, he tells about making use of a giant champagne glass built for another movie. They needed to fill it with water and then use it as a whirlpool sequence when the ship is sucked through a tear in an artery. Although he never mentions the movie's name in the book, it's often thought that he was referring to What a Way to Go in 1964, which had a sequence of Shirley MacLaine lounging in a giant champagne glass. The scenes in the spacious corridors of the secret medical facility were filmed in the lower and upper concourses of the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena. This is the same area that the director used in the exterior shots of Soylent Green in 1973. Now, this is kind of crazy. During the filming, one of the two 3-inch Proteus models that were used in the miniaturization process sequence was left in an open window, and it was subsequently carried off by a crow. It's never really explained why the Proteus crew must communicate by code rather than by voice transmission. In the film, the crew, apart from the saboteur, managed to leave the body safely before they reverted back to normal size. But the Proteus remains inside, as do the remains of the saboteur's body, although he was digested by white blood cells. Isaac Asimov pointed out that this was a serious logical flaw in the plot, since the submarine, even if it was reduced to bits of debris, would also revert back to normal size, and this would kill the man in the process. With this in mind, he wrote the novel in a different way. He had the crew provoke the white blood cells into following them, so that it drags the submarine to the tear duct and its wreckage expands outside of the body. Now let's talk about the lovely Raquel Welch. While they were filming the scenes where the other crew members remove attacking antibodies from her, during the first take, director Richard Flesher allowed the actors to grab whatever they pleased. Being the gentlemen that they were, they all specifically avoided removing them from Raquel Welch's breast, with the end result being what the director described as a Vegas showgirl effect. He pointed this out to the cast members, and on the second try, he told the actors to reach for her breast. And he didn't have to say that twice. They did this, and they ended up with a similar effect. They all ended up grabbing for her breast, because you wouldn't want to pass up an opportunity like that. Then finally, the director realized that he was just going to have to choreograph the whole thing and have the movements be known exactly where they were going to put their hands. And that's what they did in the final cut. Now, it's also said that Raquel Welch was just completely infatuated with Stephen Boyd while they were making this movie, but he declined all her advances. The film received mostly positive reviews, with a very few of them being critical. There have been plans for a sequel or a remake that have been in discussion since 1984. But the project is just stuck in developmental stalemate. There's been some really big directors that have showed interest in it, like James Cameron But he decided to devote his efforts at the time to the movie Avatar. What a great movie this is. You watch it today and the special effects are a little bit dated, but for its time, this was a classic, and it's fun to look back on it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.